Nigeria's gross domestic products grew 3.11% in the first quarter of 2022, slower than in the previous quarter as a fall in oil production hit the rest of the economy as released by the National Statistics Office. This is the sixth consecutive quarter of growth, with the non-oil sectors helping Nigeria bounce back from a severe recession caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The full-year GDP figure for 2021 showed the fastest growth in 7 years. Now, the gross domestic products grew by 3.98% in the fourth quarter of 2021. In the first 3 months of last year, the growth was rated at 0.51%. The National Bureau of Statistics said that non-oil sectors such as financials, communication, trade, and healthcare were among the fastest growing. However, oil refining, crude, petroleum, and natural gas, including road transport, quarrying, and other minerals, were said to be lagging. The naira hit a record low of 609 against the dollar on the black market, where it is freely traded as the GDP data was announced. And looking at the oil sector, it shrank by 26.04% in the first quarter, compared with an 8.06% contraction the previous quarter. Crude production fell to 1.49 million barrels per day in the first quarter from 1.50 million barrels in the previous 3 months. Meanwhile, frequent vandalism and illegal refining in the oil-producing Niger Delta region have kept the sector under pressure. As a result of these, Nigeria has struggled to meet its production targets, partly missing out on the effects of the global surge in oil prices. Now, the weak growth could prompt the central bank to keep its dovish stance at a policy meeting, which is to be held today if it is not already holding, despite double-digit inflation, analysts have said. So, today, we are discussing the improvement of Nigeria's GDP in Q1 2022. This is Business Edge. I am Lekan Onabanjo, standing in for Tolu Lokbe at the Leru Balogun. You're welcome. And joining me to unpack today's discussion from here in Lagos, Nigeria, is Gospel Obele. He's a chief economist, Streetnomics Limited. Good morning to you, Gospel. Once again, it's nice to have you join us on Business Edge.
Good morning, Lekan. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. So, according to reports, Nigeria's GDP rose by 3.11%. Slower than what was previously recorded in the last quarter, and this was duly because of the oil production that dwindled and, of course, the economy that shrunk, as it were. But then tell us, do you think an effective economy or an effective diversification of the economy could have averted this particular data that we have as regards to GDP?
First of all, I mean, it's very important to state that the Nigerian economy is already diversified. I mean, over 50% of economic activities now can be attributed to the services sector. You know, then you have about the other 50% shared amongst agricultural and industry sector. On the other hand of things, you have a situation where about 93 to 94% of the Nigerian economy is currently powered by the non-oil sector. And then about 6 to 6.5% is powered by the oil and gas sector. So technically, the Nigerian economy is diversified. In fact, the positive growth rates that we see right now are largely powered by the non-oil sector and the services sector, as it were. It depends on where you're looking at it from. And that's to tell us that we already have a diversified economy. What we don't have is a productive economy. That's number one. Number two, what we don't have is the fact that we've not been able to move from economic diversification to diversifying our revenue structure, all right, and building some form of sustainable mechanism around how we make money from the non-oil sector and the services sector particularly. So the problem is not really diversifying the Nigerian economy, which it is already diversified. The problem is how are you enabling and driving productivity around the services block and the non-oil sector block, which are the two major legs for the positive growth rates we are seeing right now.
All right. Well, it is the sixth consecutive growth as was recorded, and The non-oil sectors were said to have helped in that bit in helping the economy grow to bounce back from severe recession, as it were. But tell me, Gospel, which of the non-oil sectors would you say are responsible for the growth recorded?
Yeah, so there's quite a critical number of them. You know, you have ICT, you have financial services, you have telecoms as well. You know, those are headline sectors that really powering up the growth of the non-oil space. In one or two cases as well, agriculture, all right, and all of that. But then again, if you look at agriculture and sectors like agriculture, the engine has been on the primary sector or on the subsistence subsector in that space. And this in this regard, we're talking about the crop and farming sector, as it were. And technically, if we need to move from, like I mentioned earlier on, from just non-oil powered growth to non-oil productive revenue growth or productive growth basis, then we need to move from a cropping and farming heavily structured agricultural sector to a value processing structure, agricultural sector. That said, but then again, it's now to let you know that the leading sectors are really powering growth in the non-oil space are also the sectors where, we have a lot of high-level consumer traction. There's a lot of resilience when you look at it from a stakeholder standpoint. That means when you look at it from businesses trying to, do something critical, something interesting in those sectors, and consumers who literally cannot do without, consumers can't do without transactions every day. Consumers can't do without making phone calls. Consumers can't do without technology, digital, and all of those solutions and all that. So these sectors are largely powered by the resilience of economic stakeholders there, not necessarily by strategic policy actions, tailored from government to steer those sectors to, productive pipelines, as it were. So what we've seen in terms of positive growth rates, even coming from the recession, both the double blow recession we had during the pandemic, we've seen that the non-oil sectors were the sectors that sort of brought us out of that recession, and they are currently the sectors that are keeping us out of recession into the positive growth rate blocks. And if things continue like this, they would even take us to higher growth rates. But that doesn't necessarily mean that inflation will be curbed. That doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of life will be improved, all right? Because we are seeing GDP growth rates coexisting with worsening standard of living. We're seeing GDP growth rate coexisting with a high-level poverty rate. The average Nigerian is getting poorer on a month-to-month basis. And that's because GDP growth rates measures economic activities, all right, not economic productivity. All right, there's a difference between when you may be active, but you're not productive. These are two different conversations. Infrastructure may be bad, but economic activities are still on the rise. So these are the critical conversations we need to start having. How do we move from just economic growth rates powered by non-oil to positioning non-oil for productivity so that it works for the average Nigerian as well as it secures good revenue prospects for the country?
All right, let's look at the year 2021. Now, we understand that it's recorded the fastest growth rate. And of course, you've mentioned the fact that the non-oil sector performed creditably. Now, I would like you to let me know what did Nigeria actually do differently in terms of ensuring that they sustain and improve, because we're looking at how to have a better economic outlook feeding forward. So what did they do well and differently in 2021 that you think we can consolidate in order to have a better economy when we look at the years to come?
Okay, so like I mentioned, the sectors that are really powering for growth are, interestingly also, the sectors that are highly consumer-driven and focused on innovation. So, and I mentioned also that the government is not necessarily strategically involved in enabling the sectors thrive in the sense. If you take a look at ICT now, telecommunications, financial transactions, and all that, when we talk about the economic stakeholders who make those things work resiliently, you talk about corporates, you talk about businesses, you talk about households, you talk about consumers, all right? These are the three blocks of stakeholders who drive resiliently in terms of powering growth in those sectors, all right? And because they are also high-level innovation driven, all right, a lot of the activities in these sectors are also tailored to solving Nigeria's biggest social problems like flutter wave and the likes, all right? We begin to see that they are resiliently engaging the narrative of GDP growth construction in Nigeria. So what I'm saying this to let us know that the idea of sustainability is still very much hinged on the fact that these sectors are resilient, right, regardless of government. So government has not really done anything, very, very strict. They have done some things, not to say they've not done anything, but the measure of what you have done is the result we got from what you have done in the context, all right? So what is the level of results gotten from all of the policies you've done, you've enacted in all of these sectors? We've not really seen anything in that context. So I rather want to say that the sustainability function is still very hinged on the resilience of this sector, right? But rather, I aspire or hope to see someday that government policies can also be tailored strategically to powering up all of these sectors to become key productivity drivers for the average Nigerian and the economy at large, when you look at it also from a revenue standpoint.
So with what you've said, Gospel, can we safely deduce that even as economic experts have also decried, issues of taxation, dwindled support, and of course a choky business environment have also contributed in choking these non-oil sectors in terms of their contributions? These economic experts have said that it has actually dented their contributions and their activities and made it impossible for the economy to grow. So can we also correlate what you're saying with what the economic experts are also decrying?
I mean, the fact that you even have sectors that are really powering Nigeria's economic growth resiliently and consistently over time is a miracle. It's a miracle because the average business, the average government, the average business, the average household is stretched on all fronts due to failing government policies or, MDAs who are structured to extract revenue than to support businesses or support economic stakeholders, all right? We haven't done a lot around powering up. We haven't done a lot around creating an enabling business environment, all right? Supply chains, logistics in Nigeria are still broken because of infrastructure deficits, all right? And because of the threats from the insecurity standpoint and all of that. So we haven't done enough in that regard, but yet you can hear the Senate raising targets for MDAs, for revenue targets for MDAs on a year-on-year, and initially with focuses on taxes and all that. So I strongly agree that those taxes and co have not really powered or positioned SMEs, to do more for the environment and also enable the business environment in some sense. I agree with that on that premise. But however, we need to focus more on enabling, and which is the bigger game here, and it's beyond the tax conversation or beyond the tax argument. And with enabling, you talk about human capital, you talk about education, you talk about health, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about access to market, because no matter how your SMEs grow and develop, if your markets don't grow and develop accordingly, especially when you look at positioning those markets for global markets as well, all right, those SMEs will shrink in terms of innovative capacity and capacity to do more with what they can do right now. All right, I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
Of course.
The capacity for the pace at which your SMEs will become productive and in turn bring foreign exchange to your economy is the pace at which your markets are developed and the pace at which those markets are linked to the global markets as well. So that's a narrative that's gone beyond taxes, to enabling the whole business environment as a structure in itself.
Well, looking at the entire business environment, we've talked about the oil sector, the non-oil sector rather. So we're going to go on a break now, and when we return, we get to look at the oil sector, why it is underperforming and the challenges in it. Maybe you can prefer some solutions that can help out in that area. But you get to stay with us for a while, Gospel. I'll be back with you. Of course, there have been inconsistencies in Nigeria's GDP growth in the last few quarters, judging from last year to date, but it's been seen as encouraging, though more can be done. Non-oil sectors have been major contributors, but what about the oil sector, which accounts for a large chunk of budgetary provisions? What are the challenges responsible for this perceived underperformance? We get to engage our guests at the other side of this break, so you get to stay with us. Of course, the conversation will continue. We have been reviewing Nigeria's GDP growth rate in Q1 2022. And still with me is Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics Limited. So back to you, Gospel. Before we talk about the oil sector, let's quickly touch down on the naira that is said to have hit about 609 to a dollar on the black market. So we are wondering, why is that so? And of course, you get to tell us, what's your own evaluation of the CBN policies, monetary policies so far in terms of the naira?
Anybody who's surprised right now that the naira has hit 609, in fact, I would be surprised at anybody who is surprised right now that the naira has hit 609 to start with. And that's because, we've been talking about this for a long time. The value of your currency is strongly dependent on the level of productivity in your economy. All right. If your economy is not productive, your currency cannot be competitive at a valuation, when you think about it from a valuation standpoint. So it's very simple input and output conversation. The policies of the central bank have been firefighting to a large extent. It's been chasing shadows and chasing the wrong thing, chasing cryptos, chasing BDC sale to Bureau de Change. No. We need to begin to think of the structural elements around our fiscal side and monetary side, all right, that hamper heavily on our productivity as a nation. That's where we need to start from. Until we fix that, the naira will keep worsening. We'll keep having this conversation, and all that. So we need to first deal with the structural issues. Until the economy is powered up and our non-oil sector particularly, all right, are powered up enough such that the cocoa you're producing from Nigeria can be translated into chocolates, and those chocolates are competitive or can compete with the chocolate in the UK and with the chocolate in Switzerland. Until we can do that, and those Nigerian chocolates can sell in Tesco UK, in Sainsbury's UK, all right, and you can make money from those things. Until we do that, the naira can never be competitive.
That's a bit affirmative coming from you there, but that could just be the reality. Now, let's quickly now look at the oil sector. OPEC Plus at one time mandated that Nigeria should up or rev up the crude oil production so that they can exploit the vacuum created by the Russia-Ukraine crisis and all that. But then Nigeria has not been able to do that. So tell us, what are actually the limitations, and how do you think Nigeria can address that also?
I mean, the limitations first start from being a reactive nation in the first place. Reactive nation would mean that being a reactive nation would mean that anything that happens in the global space, hits you really hard. Not just hits you really hard, hits the average Nigerian really, really hard. So with COVID-19 that happened, all right, with oil price fluctuations in 2016, that also happened. Now with the Russia and Ukraine war, that's still happening. We just don't learn from our lessons, to be quite honest. Nigeria has almost 6 refineries, and none of them, all right, is working enough to produce, and everybody is depending on one refinery that's to launch in the next 2-3 months. That is just it's sickening technically. So in my own opinion, first of all, is the fact that we've not even built the structural base, such that we can take those shocks, and still be safe as a nation. All right, nations at the lower rung of the developmental ladder are largely vulnerable to external shocks, no matter how you want to put the argument. All right, so this conversation is going to keep happening. All right, as long as the Russia-Ukraine war still keeps happening, because our supply chains are disrupted, or that's affecting pricing. That's also affecting cost of importation, and the value of your currency is also at the mercy of this geopolitics conversation and all the like. So until we begin to do the right structural things to start with, our economy is going to be positioned, or will keep being positioned, as a reactionary-driven, vulnerable economy. We need to switch that to a proactive-driven, sustainable economy in the context. Until we do that, I don't think we're going to make any significant progress with the oil and gas sector.
So quickly, Gospel, when you say proactive measures being put in place, of course, that means to prevent or preempt a situation, deal with it before they even occur. What are those things you think the Nigerian government should do? Maybe just touch down on 1, 2, or 3 quickly.
First question is, why are we not decentralizing, oil refinery and oil production and all of that? Why are we always importing? We have 6 refineries that could be fixed technically. If an intentional government and an intentional economy will fix those refineries. And those refineries have what it takes, right, to supply in terms of home consumption and all that. And also on the flip side, why have we not fixed power? Because technically, the highest market for PMS in Nigeria are not necessarily road users or car owners. They are the households. The average person who takes the keg to the filling station to buy for his generator at home. Right? If you fix power, Nigerians will have no business taking kegs to the filling stations, and all of that. Nigerians will have no business of such. And then you'll now be left with a small niche of the market who probably go there to fill their cars, on a day-to-day or weekly basis and all that. So you cut demand by half. And if you cut demand by half, it means that you cut supply by half. I mean, it's a very simple conversation. And it's also the reason why we're also having this subsidy conversation. Subsidy is not the focus. The focus should be dealing with the demand-supply dynamics. If you fix power, there'll be no subsidy conversation in the first place. So first of all, we need to go back to the structural dynamics. The structural dynamics is what can we save on before we start dealing with the major monster in the room, which is fixing the refinery. We can save by fixing power. That way you cut down demand on PMS. All right, then we now focus on reworking the refineries to supply enough internally for those who need fuel or PMS on a week-on-week, which are largely car owners and all that. So once that is done, we begin to cut off dependence and being open to external shocks and all that. Those two things need to be done, and then the proper regulation of the sector. I do not think that the sector is being properly regulated, and as a result of that, has some form of induced leakages. Just from not regulating properly, you have some leakages, and people are taking advantage of those leakages. And I don't think it's healthy for the economy going forward. So fix power, fix the refineries, then this whole conversation won't be happening in the first place.
So finally, Gospel, to just wrap it up, in all of the discussions that we've been having, what do you think the likely impact will be on the CBN's interest rate? Because that will be decided today.
I think the central bank is in a fix. A lot of things are moving right now. And the likelihood that the central bank will hold its decisions is still very high, because a lot of investments are also going to the Nigerian economy technically. And you don't want to position those investments in such a way that they are at risk of a high exchange rate when you think of paying back, or when you think of which is also a plus for investors. But then for the person who has lent the monies, you'll be paying back at a higher amount, and that may also disrupt the economy at the moment, being the fact that inflation is on the rise and the naira is worsening. So the central bank may still be at a fix to hold these parameters, because you still need to watch how things plays out. And that's again what happens when your economy is at the vulnerable end of things. You would not be able to make important decisions because you are caged to become reactionary in your approach. And holding the currency is actually reactionary. In as much as it's a safe place to be, it's also a reactive place to be. All right, if you look at the global finance ranking of the central bank governors, the Nigerian central bank governor was ranked at a B+ or so, which is one of the low rankings. And one of the reasons were because our policies were reactionary, and there's been a long-term holding of the rates. Right. And if you think about it very well, it's not the best place for us to be. But then if you shift goalposts, things will go worse. And that's because we've not done the structural things that needs to happen first.
All right, thank you so much, Gospel Obele. Your contributions have been very robust.
Thank you so much for having me, Lekan.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much. God bless. Well, that's a wrap. Well, Gospel Obele is saying that we have to be proactive rather than being reactionary if we hope to get things right in the oil and non-oil sectors. Let's quickly run off on this break, and when we return, it will be time for NC4 to watch. Do stay with us. On NC4 to watch, let's quickly take you to this first story, which says that the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited and the Sahara Group received two 23,000 CBM liquefied petroleum gas vessels from the Hyundai MIPO shipyard in Ulsan, South Korea, with plans to add 10 more vessels in the next 10 years to help Africa transition to greener fuels. Now to Kenya. Kenya Airways has suspended ticketing services in Malawi over the country's biting dollar shortage crisis. As a result, passengers traveling from Malawi on the airline must buy their tickets from agents in other countries. Now, people shouldn't completely shun the crypto world after the recent collapse of a popular stablecoin. An official at the International Monetary Fund has said Terra USD or UST imploded earlier this month, setting off a chain reaction that saw the overall value of the cryptocurrency market slashed by hundreds of billions of dollars. And finally, Crude oil prices have fallen by more than $1 on Tuesday as concerns over a possible recession and China's COVID-19 curbs outweighed an expectation of tight global supply and a pickup in fuel demand with the U.S. summer driving season. Now, Brent crude futures for July fell $1.34 or 1.2% to $112.08 a barrel by 0606 GMT. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures for July delivery dropped $1.28 or 1.2% to $109.09 a barrel. And that is the end of Business Edge for today. Do not forget that you can visit our website, www.newscentral.africa, and of course, download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store, while also engaging with the different conversations that we have for you on our social media platforms at News Central TV. See you some other time. I am Lekan Onabanjo. Enjoy the rest of your day.